absolutely dominated this dog. It's horrendous. I don't know if you've ever had to get involved in a dog fight. It is absolutely horrendous. But this dog was getting killed, so I dived in to help out. Turns out I did save his life. But I ended up that night under a general anesthetic with a plastic surgeon putting my hands together. I'm not going to a dog beach where dogs are running around loose. I'm not going to do it. I'm not some shrinking violet. I'm a rational person, and I will not go to that beach for good reason. But with the way that the laws are at the moment, I have no beach that I can go to. Your policy being binary says dog beach or nothing. I'm in the or nothing category, through no fault of my own. But when you look at the coastline, we've got about 30 kilometers of coastline. 6% of that is allocated to those 3 areas. You can say, look, there's another area that can be allocated reasonably where we have recreational use. You can add another 10%, another 3 kilometers in there if you want. But you basically end up to around about 20% of the 30 Ks of beach that we have is allocated. The rest is unallocated. There's no use. Why is it that when I ask the question of, how about catering for people like me that just want to go to a beach and have your dog on a lead instead of having the free-for-all, why is that so hard? I'll tell you why it's so hard. It's because you've got your binary policy. You just invested in this policy, and when the question is asked is, can you do something slightly different? It's too hard. You can't do it, and that's my complaint. And your coastal management plan is predicated on that binary thing. And there's no give and take. It is discriminatory. It does discriminate against me. It discriminates the old lady with Fifi, who's got this little dog, and she's just nervous, and now she can't walk down there. She is actually actively discriminated against, not in a woke way, in a real way where she has been denied the access she's entitled to. So the beach hasn't been used properly. It is discriminatory. When I wrote a letter to the council, I included a website because it is another way of managing the beaches, not some cranky idea from some left-wing guy. The website is one that it seems to cover all of the state of Victoria. They cover about 5 areas. You know, an area would be something like Gippsland or the Mornington Peninsula, and then they break it down to about 68 or 69 localities. Now, a locality would be something like St Kilda, and they've got maps of everything. And you look at the map for St Kilda, and there it is, several kilometres of beach. And you look at how they do it. They haven't done it like we do it here, where you've got 80% of unallocated beach. They haven't done it like that. They seem to do it this way. They seem to look at the coastline and say, what land do we have to give to the community, which is where all the people go for swimming or windsurfing or whatever. They take that away and say, that is a prohibition area. Then they also have areas where it's unsafe. They put a prohibition on that. And then parks actually put a prohibition if there's a park there. Now, that actually only takes up about 10 or 20% of their coastline. The other 80% is now broken into specific beaches for the community. And it varies. The size of the beach varies, and then the allocation of how you can put a dog on the beach varies all the time as well. You get places where, say, on this place here, you have to have the dog on a leash. That place you can have on and off. Sometimes there's a time constraint, but they've thought through every particular part of their beach and said, how can we put dogs onto this beach?
2 minutes remaining, Mr. McCarthy.
Okay. So that's different. It's different from us saying that's what the dog gets. But that's not the only place that happens. In your letter to me, they said, we've looked at the holiday areas and we are similar to other places. They seem to operate the binary system as well, and that's true. But what they didn't look at is Mandurah. Mandurah has exactly the policy that you see in Victoria. Exactly that. The writers of this plan have never been to Mandurah. They need to go to Mandurah because they've got a working system that is not discriminatory, a system where they don't have 80% of their beach unallocated. all of the beaches allocated. And what they've got, they've got 24 beaches, which we call a dog beach, where you can be on and off a lead. They have 10 where you have to be on a lead. You've got 16 areas of community use, which is a prohibition. And they have no dog problem. Their problems are solved. Everything is done. There's no discrimination. There's nothing. And my suggestion and my request of you is to get some of your senior people to go down there, have the discussion and say, why have you done this? Why are you different from everybody else? Go down there and find out and see what you can do, because they've solved the problem, and people like me will not be standing here whining away, because I would have somewhere to take my dog. The old lady with Fifi would have somewhere to take her dog. But here we have unallocated land, 80% of it, and you do nothing about it. And when I write in, they say, well, look, just go to a park. Now, come on. You need to actually look at the policy. Just in finishing off, talking about the plan that you've written there.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
Can I
that's
just
actually
finish?
time. I'm sorry, that's actually time.
Okay.
We will take those your comments on notice, and I think administration will be having a look at some of your suggestions. Thank you for your time. Our second deputation is on item 4.3, which is consideration of proposed Central Precinct Local Structure Plan number 106 to 101K, Scotthorn Drive, Eglinton, and the speakers are Stuart Rayside, Urban Quarter, and Delaney Thorman, CLE Town Planning and Design. You please make your way to the lectern and your names and address for the records, please.
Good evening, everyone. So my name's Stuart Reside, and Eleni Thorman is joining me this evening as well. So I'll be just making our deputation this evening. I asked Eleni to come up if there were any questions, specific questions. Eleni works for CLE Planning and Design. I'm the General Manager of Urban Quarter. I recognise everyone's faces. I hope you recognise mine. We've sort of been in front of Council several times. Urban Quarter has been involved in the City of Wanneroo since about 2016, when we acquired a land holding in the Alkimos Eglinton precinct. And look, I've just got to say at the outset, we've very much enjoyed our time working in the city. We genuinely have. We work all over Perth in residential land development, and our time in the city has been very positive, working with Mark Dixon, Greg Bowring and his planning team, and the rest of the administration. So yes, to that extent, I'd like to recognise the city's officers in their report this evening. We support the recommendation to support this local structure plan. There's been a lot of work put into it. A lot of technical reporting has been concluded. However, there is one element of it which we are here to talk about this evening, which is the proposed modification to the structure plan to include a pedestrian rail crossing across the Antship rail line. As I'm sure you can appreciate, this is a significant issue. It is a significant piece of infrastructure, and we would like to oppose the inclusion of it tonight. And I'd like to, I suppose, summarise our position on it so far. You may have the district structure plan in front of you, but most importantly, this sort of infrastructure is identified at the district structure plan stage for very good reason, and that is to organise the funding of such significant infrastructure and for it to be captured in land values. It's certainly not to be coming in halfway through the development of an area at this point in time, when land values have already been determined, and I guess it's to that extent it is a significant change to the district structure plan, which is the overarching document. There are two pedestrian crossings identified in the district structure plan already, and always have been identified in the district structure plan. One north of our landholding, taking pedestrians to the service commercial area on the east side in the Eglinton Estates land, and one south of our landholding, taking residents to the district open space. Two destination land uses, and that's what they're designed for. and they always were for. I don't know the ins and outs necessarily, but I understand that those two pedestrian crossings have been removed. One of those pedestrian crossings, I might add, is in land owned by the state, Development WA, and was recently removed from the district structure plan, predominantly on cost grounds. So that's our first point. In our view, the city has not clearly established in this particular location where there is a limited catchment on either side and no destination land uses for people to walk. Yes, we recognise that there is a neighbourhood and people might like to walk to neighbours' houses. I appreciate that, I really do. But there is no destination land uses that are what this type of infrastructure needs to justify the cost. So to that extent, we don't believe the city's provided any justification for the need for this infrastructure in this location, nor the connection to our piece of land or our project alone. And when I say our project, I'm talking about the future residents that are going to ultimately be paying for this infrastructure. We have had traffic engineers assess the demand and the likely patronage of this rail crossing in the context of where it's proposed to be, and the fact that there are no destination land uses on either side of it, such as schools, shopping or recreation areas. So there's no reason necessarily for people to move east and west in this particular location. So that's confirmed there is a very limited demand. There's been no request by any other government agencies for this infrastructure, in particular the Public Transport Authority, who have the ultimate actual say with respect to the infrastructure that goes across their rail line. And the infrastructure will cost, we've had it costed by the PTA, and I understand the state had it costed by the PTA on their Alkimos project, which was $3 million at the time, which was probably 2 years ago. We'd expect that would be easily $4 million now, and will require the closure of the rail line because the opportunity to build it prior to the rail line has gone. So this is a significant cost. From our point of view, if we were just to ascertain the cost to the residents that ultimately would be paying for it, which are the residents on the east side of the rail crossing, there's about 450 dwellings in there. When you consider the overall, the life cycle cost of this particular project, of this particular piece of infrastructure, lot prices would need to cover it, lot prices will need to increase by $15,000 to $20,000 a lot. The Alkimos-Eglinton District to develop a contribution plan costs about $3,800 a lot, to put that into context. Now that plan is going to deliver fantastic infrastructure, schools, pools, tennis courts, libraries, surf clubs, used by thousands of people every day. And we are all for it, and we are all supportive for that type of cost, which is commensurate and suitable with the market at $3,800 a lot. Not $15,000 to $20,000 a lot for infrastructure used by a handful of residents. So we believe it's cost prohibitive and it will have a significant impact on affordability. And I suppose that's my main point tonight, is that I implore the council, who I believe has a responsibility, to genuinely consider the impact on affordable housing. This is a particular location where our objective is to deliver affordable housing, just by virtue of its location. We're not on the coast, we're not a premium offering in the area. We're offering affordable lots to first home buyers. So again, we appreciate the desire for a crossing. I've got young kids, I like to see active recreation, walking, cycling in an area. But we need to consider the context of this particular modification. We really do. And its cost. And I would ask that you do that tonight. I think that the council does have a responsibility to ensure that infrastructure aligns with the community's needs and the impact on housing. I suppose essentially we see this as a nice to have. It is not essential. It is a nice to have piece of infrastructure, and in our view, it does not pass the cost benefit test. So look, I hope I've provided some background, some consideration. We don't want to see this. I guess we don't like seeing waste, to be honest with you, and we think that this type of cost needs to be carefully considered. And as I said at the outset, pedestrian crossings have already been identified in the district structure plan, none in this location. and the two that were identified have been removed. So, to that extent, I guess what I would be requesting tonight is that you support the modification with the exclusion of that particular. So you support the recommendation to approve the structure plan with the exception of that particular modification. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roadside.
Yeah.
Just a point of clarification for me, you did mention that the DCP itself covers the cost or a percentage of the cost of the pools. My understanding is that that's not the case, that it's only the dry court facilities, not the aquatic facilities itself. Just wanted to make sure we got that clarification right. Thank you. Are there any questions of clarification at all from the speakers? We have a couple of minutes, councillors. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, look, thanks. One of the questions I had with this, and I do remember, I think when you came in before to give us a talk in a forum session, and you talked about the district structure plan for this area, but was this area not originally designated for light industrial or employment zone, and it got rezoned after the district structure plan, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
So, but you introduced the fact that this should have been identified during the district structure plan. It wasn't, because it was going to be an employment area of some sort.
Yeah.
And it would have been more of a drive to, bike to sort of situation, not a walk to. And now it's becoming an urban development. Obviously, under the livable neighbourhoods policies, we need people to be able to walk to centres. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I don't understand.
And I recognise that, and I appreciate that background, I do. But I suppose the principles remain the same, that there's nowhere within a walkable catchment, apart from neighbours, that people are going to cross this bridge. So the pedestrian crossings have been planned for and costed and identified originally as being needed to take pedestrians to destination land uses, such as work, schools or recreation. And if you look at this particular location, as it stands, whether our land was originally zoned employment or residential as it stands now, there are no such destinations east or west within a walkable catchment. So it's a question of, can you measure the patronage of this particular crossing? And if you can't measure the patronage, how do you weigh up the benefit? Because, you know, if this was a $100,000 piece of infrastructure, sure, but it's significant, and it's so significant that it means the difference between, you know, ultimately whether the land will be commercially viable or not. So I recognise that background, but as I say, I believe the principles remain the same, and you can see that when you look at the district structure plan as it was originally drafted. Those pedestrian crossings are showing moving pedestrians from residential areas to non-residential areas essentially. There was one perfectly placed, taking people to the district open space south of Alkimos Vista. Yep. To my mind, makes good sense, where people are going to want to ride or walk on the weekends to sporting facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Roadside.
Thank you.
I think that's
Yep.
that question.
My
No,
answer.
I think
Yep.
we've had enough there, councillors. We'll be moving on to the next deputation.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yep, appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councillors, the next deputation is on item 4.5, which is consideration following advertising of amendment number 198 to DPS 2 to introduce an additional use of car park at lot 108252 Neves Road, Meridianup. And the speaker is Mr. Murray Castleton. Mr. Castleton, you could, when you're making your way down, state your name and address for our records, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. My name is Murray Castleton. I'm a town planner at Element, and our address is level 18, 191 St George's Terrace. I'll be speaking in support of the officer's recommendation for item 4.5 on behalf of the landowners, Roslyn and Jeremy Leach. We thank the city's officers for the fair and objective manner in which they have dealt with and assessed the scheme amendment request, and respectfully request that Council adopt the officer recommendation. Amendment number 198 was advertised for 67 days and received 40 submissions in support and 17 objections. The high level of support for the amendment is noted and appreciated and likely reflects the significant demand for the proposed use in a convenient location. The issues raised by the objectors include impacts on local area amenity and adjoining properties, potential future scale of the business, use for inappropriate commercial vehicle parking, traffic, bushfire and noise concerns. We have fully responded to and resolved all these issues to the satisfaction of the City's officers. A draft concept plan has also been prepared to assist with addressing the issues raised during advertising and has been included at attachment 5 to the report. The concept plan illustrates the existing and proposed landscaping that will be used to screen the development from adjoining properties and Neves Road. A new shed has also been identified on the site plan and will be installed if the scheme amendment and subsequent development application are successful. The shed will provide significant visual screening to the western neighbour. We note that the plan is still only a concept. Once certainty has been achieved through the approval of Amendment 198, a development application will be lodged with the City for the proposed additions, including the new shed and further landscaping and screening. As shown on the provided concept plan, the business is proposed to accommodate a maximum of 60 vehicles. With the exception of the new shed and additional screen landscaping, no further modifications to the site and established on-site vegetation are required to accommodate the vehicles. This is, by any objective measure, a small-scale facility. There are also no plans to expand the business further, and the additional use area scheme map included at attachment 6 to the report has been modified to only include the 5,000 square metre central area of the site that is required to store the vehicles. The reduction of the additional use area should alleviate concerns regarding the potential expansion of the business and a lack of specific planning or development controls. As mentioned in the report, a separate planning scheme amendment, that being scheme amendment number 199, has been prepared by the City in response to the increasing demand for places to store recreational vehicles, including caravans, boats and trailers. Amendment number 199 proposes to make the car park land use a discretionary use subject to advertising in the general rural and rural resource zones. In this respect, it is evident that there is a need and demand in the City of Wanneroo for places to store these types of vehicles. The officer report details instances where complaints have been made regarding illegal parking of recreational vehicles on verges and carriageways, as residents have no space within their small residential lots. It is evident that more needs to be done to satisfy this demand, and the proposal before you directly responds to the demand for the storage of caravans and will provide a convenient and safe place for local residents to utilise. The original scheme amendment report lodged with the City proposed to introduce storage yards as an additional use allowance on the subject site. The definition of a storage yard means any land or buildings used for the storage of goods, equipment, plant or materials. As such, it was originally unclear what limitations applied to the storage of vehicles on the subject site. The report has since been updated to reflect a more limited car park additional use at the site following consultation with the City's officers. Due to the nature of the car park and commercial vehicle definitions, liaison between the landowners and the City has been required to establish the correct definition to be applied to certain types of vehicles. There is no intention to store commercial vehicles on site. However, in instances where it is unclear, the landowners are happy to continue working with the City to resolve any concerns that may arise and to remove any vehicles that may be classified as a commercial vehicle. As is detailed in the report, this liaison has already occurred and issues satisfactorily resolved. It is noted that a few submissions were concerned that an industrial type land use was proposed within a rural area. The site is zoned general rural, and although sites within this zone are often used for rural lifestyle purposes, there are also a wide range of other uses and developments that can be considered in these areas. Land uses that are already capable of approval include aquaculture, camping grounds, catteries, equestrian uses, certain types of industrial activity, intensive agriculture, plant nurseries, restaurants, and veterinary establishments. Many of these uses are relatively intensive and could have a much more significant impact on local and neighbour amenity than the proposed car park. Due to the significant size of the subject site and adjoining sites, the proposed designation of a restricted area for the use and the visual screening measures proposed, it is considered an appropriate site for a smaller scale car park. The business will be able to continue to provide a vital, affordable service for local residents in nearby urban areas and will allow for the preservation of the amenity of residential streetscapes by removing the need for residents to illegally park their recreational vehicles on street verges. The car park use is also an appropriate interim use that can be temporarily accommodated on the subject site until this area is urbanised in future in accordance with the intentions of the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan. Now, matters have also been raised in relation to bushfire, traffic and noise, and we actually went back to the technical consultants to get the appropriate material to respond to those concerns, and that has been included and attached to the officer's report. And just a couple of final points, because I'm mindful that I've probably been droning on for a while here. The proposed modification to land use permissibility. So it's noted that the officer's recommendation to support amendment number 198 includes a modification to the proposed land use permissibility of the additional use of car park from a discretionary use to an A use, ensuring that any application proposing a car park would be subject to mandatory advertising. And we understand that this has been proposed in accordance with amendment number 199, which proposes to list car park as an A use. Now, we have no objection to this modification, as it is our intention to lodge a comprehensive development application for the car park once the scheme amendment has been finalised. Given the level of interest in the proposal, we think it is appropriate that it be advertised and that neighbours and others in the locality be given the opportunity to review and comment on the more detailed proposal prior to council determination. As is evident in the report and from what has already been mentioned in my presentation, the landowners of the subject site have gone above and beyond to comply with the requirements of and requests from the city's planning and compliance teams. Modifications have been made or are proposed to accommodate and address the concerns of neighbours and residents. These modifications include the installation of a security gate to alleviate safety concerns, additional screen landscaping to reduce impacts on visual amenity and operating at a reduced capacity. Further modifications to reduce the impact of the development are proposed and will be carried out following a positive determination of the scheme amendment and the subsequent obtaining of the required development approval for the use. Just make a couple of observations that weren't necessarily in my deputation notes. This is clearly a fairly emotionally charged issue for some of the people who are involved. I think that's fair to say. I worked in local government for 12 years, and I think the worst thing that I ever dealt with was trying to deal with neighbours who didn't get on. It's really, really hard, and it's really difficult to find the pathway to make the right decision. It's very unfortunate, but equally, it's actually not uncommon that these sorts of things occur. Now, I do try and be truly objective in the way that I present this information. The nature of my profession and the nature of my involvement in these types of matters compels me to do so.
1 minute left, Mr. Castleton.
No problems. So I do try and be objective, and objectivity is essential and is required in this. What I would encourage the council to do is listen to your officers in relation to this matter, because they are the ones that are truly objective in dealing with the matter before council. They have no vested interest in the outcome. So thank you, and I'd be more than happy to respond to any questions.
Councillor Civic, no question of clarification.
A question of clarification. Yes, yep. In the presentation from Mr. Castleton, thank you very much. I sensed all the objectives to do with this particular development, but the one I didn't hear, and if I didn't hear it, I take it back, but was prevention of dust, if there is any dust issues at all, because in that particular area, most of the properties being rural have their own water supplies. I don't know whether many are on scheme water, but having said that, they would have rainwater tanks, etc. And I'm just very mindful that if there is dust from here, and being a rural area, there'd be dust everywhere, I guess, but more so from this type of use, it does worry me that if this does occur, would the applicant be prepared to make sure that the dust is prohibited, if I can put it in those words? Thank you.
Look, I would expect that's a matter that would be dealt with as part of the development application, and there would need to be a strategy in place to deal with the sort of summer months. Typically that's controlled by wetting the area so that there is no dust generated by vehicle movements. 100% that's a matter that should be dealt with in the development application.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr Castleton, for your time and your deputation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, our last deputation is on the same item, and our speaker is Mr Matt Stewart, Town Planning Advice. Mr Stewart. Again, if you could provide your name and address for our records. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Matt Stewart from Planning Outcomes WA, and we represent the interests of 9 landowners and residents in the immediate area of the subject site on Neves Road. So I thank the council for their time to listen to the many concerned residents regarding the storage yard, which has existed with the knowledge of the city for more than 2 years, even though it's unauthorised and prohibited. So this is a scheme amendment to permit an existing caravan storage yard on the subject site on Neves Road. So in summary, we do actually support the facilitation of caravan and boat storage within the city and even within rural zones, as it is needed. But we feel that it is inappropriate for this site, and we strongly object to the recommendation. Zone objectives. So the council report does not attempt to directly address the zone objective of, and I quote, enhancing the rural character of and amenity of the area. By contrast, the report admits that the proposal, and I quote, may not be wholly compatible with the objectives. So it's clear from the city and the applicant's report and the WAPC and our submission that the proposal does not comply with some of the zone objectives. And so I would have expected the city to advise the council if it has the ability to approve such a matter, perhaps with some legal advice. But we see no mention of that. We have gained some legal advice and we believe that the council has an obligation to refuse this item. Water licences. So it's clear that the council is deeply concerned about the removal of water licences from rural landowners and is focused on approving amendments such as this as a response. And the city's report cites this as an indirect justification for the proposal not complying with the zone objectives. However, the neighbours reveal that the site still has a water licence. The city states in response to that this is not a valid planning consideration. So which is it? Is it a valid planning consideration or not? Furthermore, 75 avocado trees have recently been planted on the site to use this water licence, with crop yields measured in the tonnes. So once again, this has been done without planning approval for intensive agriculture use. But after we advise the city, the report responds by saying that the city is satisfied that it does not need planning approval because it is a quote-unquote recreational purpose. So do you think 75 trees is commercial? That's the real question. But to be clear, however, we are not objecting to the orchard. It's actually a good idea. We're just pointing out that the city does not act on compliance issues with these sites when it does not suit their report recommendation. Specific planning measures. So this amendment now includes a building envelope of 5,000 square metres, which is a good specific planning control. However, it's not clear as to what the setbacks are, and it's curious that they're not found in the proposed additional use schedule, which could easily be done. From the proposed zoning map, it scales to around about 4.5 metres to the west and around about only 3.5 metres to the east, which doesn't really make sense given that there's a 2-storey house on both sides. So I think some simple clarification on that would be suitable. We're also very encouraged by the new storage shed to the west, which will provide some visual and acoustic screening. And it's a very good response to rural character. We do, however, wonder if it could be better placed on the sight lines between the open-air storage area and the neighbouring dwellings. It currently screens their caravans to the neighbouring sheds. We're also puzzled as to why this design response, as good as it is is not duplicated on the eastern side. Also, the new site plan shows a welcome change with proposed landscaping strips on the west of 3.5 metres, but around about 3 metres on the east. So I think some clarity there would be better. Noise issues. So we are, again, encouraged by the response from the applicant's acoustic engineer. However, it is now clear that they have not accounted for any noise from anything larger than a standard four-wheel drive. Despite us providing the city with numerous photos of many other types of heavy and noisy vehicles on site, including semi-trailer trucks, because, quote unquote, based upon our understanding, this would be atypical of the operations. But there's no evidence to support that claim. There's no explanation. And it infers that the noise levels can be grossly non-compliant with the regulations just as long as it is atypical. And I'm not really sure that's correct. They also state that they measured noise from the expansion area despite them not knowing where this was at the time, and some of this space was not being used and is on unsealed sandy ground. The schedule of submissions. Although there are many supporters in the community consultation, most of them, again, are clearly existing customers with caravans that do not live in the area and are only concerned about their streets being blocked with boats and caravan and are therefore biased. Most of the objections refer to the proposal being visually inappropriate for the locality and are the cause of a degradation in their rural lifestyle, to which the city invalidates their concerns. And the city fails to respond to our point and photos at all about the variety of these heavy vehicles that are currently being used on the site and the associated noise, bulk and amenity impacts. So in conclusion, thank you for your time. At the very least, if you could just look at the photos and try and understand how this might impact you if you live next door to it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. We do actually have a couple of minutes, councillors, if there are any questions of clarification you require. There are none. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Thank you very much. That concludes deputations, councillors. We move then on to item 4, reports, and declarations of interest by elected members, including the nature and extent of the interest, are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates, and declaration of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. So, councillors, if you could just bring to our attention any declarations when we come to those items. We move then on to planning and sustainability. Mr. Bowring and Mr. Van Hyman.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get that right. Sorry, Emil, one day.
It's fine. Thank you for that. Good evening, councillors. Tonight I'm introducing items 4.3 and 4.5 on tonight's agenda, and then myself and Emil Van Hyningen will be happy to take questions on the other items. Item 4.3 deals with a proposed new local structure plan for number 106 for lot 101 Scotthorn Drive in Eglinton. This structure plan applies to a 35-hectare area of land located between the Yanship Rail Corridor and the future Mitchell Freeway alignment, immediately to the north of the Shorehaven estate. This 35-hectare portion of land was previously zoned in the Alkimos Eglinton District Structure Plan as service commercial and was rezoned to urban in 2019. Since that time, the applicant has developed a local structure plan 106 for consideration by the City and WAPC. Following receipt of the proposal, the matter was advertised for public consultation for 42 days. 14 submissions were received, 10 of which were from servicing agencies. Of the 14 submissions, 2 objected, 7 were in support and 5 provided comment only. The comments and responses are set out in attachment 4 on page 257 of the agenda. The two objecting comments were primarily on the impact of urban sprawl on the environment. However, this land has already been identified and approved for urban development through earlier Metropolitan Region Scheme amendment processes to zone the land for urban purposes. Proposed LSP 106 demonstrates a logical pattern of urban development over this site, generally consistent with the established planning framework. The officer's report sets out in detail a range of key elements that required consideration, which have all been addressed with one exception, which is the provision of access across the Yanchep rail line corridor. The report deals with this issue in detail and sets out the context for the provision of access over the rail line to provide a linkage between the residential areas on both sides of the rail line through the provision of a bridge. The East of the Beach Structure Plan and WAPC Subdivision Approval 155700 for the area to the west of the subject site depicts and sets out the conditions for provision of a traffic bridge to connect with the subject site. The applicant is proposing in LSP 106 that there not be any connection between the two sides, which would result in a 2.4 kilometre section of track between the future Alkimos Drive and Eglinton Boulevard to the north, having no connection between them. The applicant argues that a bridge, whether traffic or pedestrian, is not needed to service the community, as there is no specific facilities that the bridge would provide access to on either side. Attachments 13 and 14 to the report set out that justification. The applicant has also spoken to these matters in their deputation. The applicant has argued that the cost of the provision of a pedestrian bridge crossing is not warranted due to a view that it would have limited use. And attachment 15 on page 312 and 313 of the agenda demonstrates that the location of the subject site and the distance between the existing and proposed crossings along the Yanchep rail line in its vicinity. All of those crossings are vehicle and pedestrian crossings combined. The applicant contends that a bridge is a district level item of infrastructure and should be shown in the district structure plan and funded through a DCP. The Alkimos Eglinton DSP, however, does not detail all items for DCP contribution and doesn't mention bridges throughout the document. However, the adopted Western Precinct Taronga Place Eglinton Local Structure Plan does specifically address the provision of a bridge at this location. Page 46 of that LSP states the following. A bridge connecting the WP LSP to the land to the east area has been shown. This area will also be serviced by the planned road network established in the DSP, which will provide opportunities for direct access from the eastern land to the strategic road network, e.g. Alkimos Drive. The bridge is therefore expected to service local traffic for the development area only. This is from the approved structure plan to the land immediately to the west of the subject site, and this clearly articulates that the bridge would provide a local level function and not a district level function, and its role was addressed in the traffic modelling to prepare and support that structure plan. That structure plan makes no mention of the bridge being part of a developer contribution plan either. Subsequently, the WAPC has granted subdivision approval, conditioning the provision of a traffic bridge in this location. There is no discussion in the structure plan about the bridge being optional in case other land was not developed. The traffic analysis and reports that were on the basis that those access points were being provided, as well as the bridge connecting the land to the east to the proposed structure plan area, or to the west of the structure plan area. While the applicant has argued that no traffic bridge in this location is required to provide a compliant road network for the LSP 106 area, and demonstrated the need for a traffic bridge has not been strongly established in either structure plan, as the bridge was only intended for to service local traffic. Administration has considered that matter and looked at the need and has, on balance, agrees that a traffic bridge may not be required in this location. However, a pedestrian bridge ought to be provided as a minimum in the interest of providing a well-connected community that aligns with the objectives of the DSP, the provisions of livable neighbourhoods and the city's own strategic plans. In relation to funding and ongoing costs associated with bridges over the rail alignment, administration has included recommendation 4, which requests the WAPC and Metronet, in consultation with the development industry, prepare a coordinated infrastructure delivery plan that will address the important issues around location and funding of crossings over the rail line. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Baring. Questions, elected members? Yep. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions with regarding the bridge, and obviously we had the deputation just a short while ago on behalf of the developer by their planners. The bridge that's been identified, I'm looking on page 313 to make it easy for myself, and it indicates what bridges are going to be put in by Metronet, what are to be put in by developers. I'm just trying to work out I'm assuming the lined area is going to be the LSP 106 structure plan. How do people get across the rail? I'm assuming that subdivision extension there, the subject site, is going to have to extend all the way up to Eglinton Boulevard. I'm trying to work out, because it just seems so strange that we're going to have a large amount of development, probably all up, anything up to 1,200 homes, that's going to have basically around about a 3 kilometre stretch of just roads without any crossing over to get to the future primary schools and the like. So how do we make that happen if the developer doesn't wish to put even a pedestrian access way in?
Thank you. It's not all entirely urban. There's a large section of open space immediately to the north along of the subject site. Yeah, it is correct. That is the subject site, marked in orange and black hatching on the eastern side of the rail line. The connections that are provided through to the north take those up to Eglinton Boulevard, which is the way around the railway line. So there wouldn't be any other connections across the railway line until Eglinton Boulevard.
So the future primary school would need to have that, because we're talking about, you know, just even in this LSP 106, we're talking about 470 dwellings, and I'm assuming that's about 1,000 people. They're going to be having children in. There's probably anything up to 600 or 700 children in time. How do they get across to the future primary school that is literally just on the other side of that railway line without a pedestrian bridge?
That's the purpose of our recommendations, to require that pedestrian bridge to be provided, so there is a connection for the community. The applicant contends, however, that there is availability to go around that through either south to Eglinton Drive, or north to Eglinton Drive, or south to Alkimos.
Obviously by bus or by car, because you're not going to walk, well, children are not going to walk 6 kilometres to get to school.
The school isn't within a walkable, what's typically defined as a walkable catchment of about 400 metres as it stands, so it's already challenged in that respect.
Does the subject site that we're talking about, and I guess when it maybe gets built out a bit further, would that site, or does that site have a need then to have its own school, primary school site?
No, there's no requirement for a school for that area. It's not large enough. The Department of Education has reviewed the LSP and provided its comments in relation to this and supported the layout.
Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. My question is on the actual bridges. I'm looking at page 313 again, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bridges which are funded by Metronet, and 2 which are planned, or 1 which is planned, I think, or not, or actually it says here, future funded by developers. Can this particular crossing not be considered by Metronet, or is there a reason for that? And I guess the imposition will be on the developer to provide that at this point in time in this report. Thank you.
My understanding would be that it would be developer funded. That'll be part, I think, of the town centre, Eglinton Town Centre. Metronet's certainly building a number of the ones where there's existing urban development and there's roads already established. it becomes less clear what will happen when they're unconstructed roads that are otherwise planned.
Councillor Nguyen.
Just in relation to the bridge as well, if we don't have that crossing, how would that affect the value of the land on either side of the railway?
So I can't directly respond to that because land valuation isn't really a factor in the decision-making process for us, although it's obviously important for the developer to provide an affordable product. We are looking at the principles around connected communities and safe access and the ease of providing an integrated community network and pedestrian path system.
And can you give us an estimate of the potentially the cost of building a pedestrian bridge or a traffic bridge? And do you agree with the estimates that's been provided by the proponent earlier?
Thank you. We haven't sought our own independent assessment of that, but we don't have significant reasons to doubt the applicant's estimations, although we do have quite a different view about how you might apportion that cost per community member and its usefulness. The issue really is, at the moment, the structure planning framework calls for a traffic bridge, and to wind that back to no connection at all is, in our view, not reasonable, and that it would not be a good result for the local community on either side of the rail corridor.
Councillor Sangali.
In the event that, sadly, a bridge may get declined, has this development considered that possibility in respect of pedestrian movements and optimising the pedestrian network to the maximum benefit, including the city's bike plans, and making sure that we're allowing for cycling, for scooters, on-road scooters as well, making sure the road reserve is wide enough to accommodate high-frequency buses, because if there's no transport network being able to get in, then we're going to be relying on public transport. So optimising all those road widths, making sure that the on-street parking is not blocking minor roads, and making sure that our footpaths are not being blocked by shorter driveways. That is also impeding on pedestrian access. Have we made sure that we are making sure that every pedestrian can move around that area freely?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's certainly part of what the local planning framework and the state planning framework is designed to deliver through, certainly through policies like livable neighbourhoods. I believe, from memory, I'm just trying to confirm, but I believe that the bus line would be up Scott Horn Drive. The developer would know this perhaps better than myself, actually, and would provide a public transport connection for the local residents. We certainly look at our infrastructure provision through the subdivision process and providing those pedestrian paths, cycle paths and routes to ensure that we have walkable communities in accordance with those planning documents.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a follow-up to a couple of questions that were just asked, Mr. Bowring. One of those is if I have to say I'm a bit concerned that we're not going to have the connectability like yourself. If that is in doubt, and there would have to have then some other form of transport going through, I haven't seen the structure plan too closely, but I'm assuming there's going to have to be some sort of main avenue through there, so there would have to have an allowance for a bus, a proper bendy bus or whatever they're going to be using later in the future to go through. So is the width of the road, does it change in that little area, or is it still going to be the normal, 9 metre or whatever it is, wide roads?
No, Scotthorn Drive is the neighbourhood connector which will run through the estate, so north-south through the estate, and that's shown on page 254 in the structure plan map. If I could, I might just impose to ask the developer as to if that was designed for a bus route, but I believe it was, but I can't recall off the top of my head. Yeah, so yes, that's right. It's designed for a bus route up Scotthorn Drive through to Eglinton Town Centre.
Yeah, and my last question, just to follow on from Councillor Nguyen, bearing in mind that the Metronet are currently building multiple bridges at the moment, could they then be asked to add a bridge within their parameters? I know that's not our place, but I think the developer or the planner suggested earlier that this could possibly cost several $1 million. But if you've got everybody on site now building bridges already there could actually be a reduction in the cost. Is it possible then that administration could maybe contact Metronet and ask what the cost would be for an additional bridge to be put in place for pedestrian use?
I understand that when PTO was initially scoping the project that they approached the developers in the corridor to ask them about what bridges should be provided and how to deal with that. And I understand at the time that probably wasn't something that this developer could actually engage in. But we certainly can continue to have that discussion with PTA, and that's part of why we've put forward that recommendation is to seek that sort of integrated response from the state government on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Baring. It's actually good to see that you used your phone a friend lifeline there. Councillor Nguyen.
Just taking that question a step further from Councillor Miles, if could we redirect the funding for that bridge to some other, I guess, initiative within that location? If, for example, PTA were to build that additional bridge?
I'm sorry, there isn't any funding for the bridge at this stage. This would be a developer cost item, so that's the situation with this application.
Further questions, Councillor Sangali?
Just going back to the footpaths and everything, and I did note that Scotthorn Drive would be the main thoroughfare, but there is quite a distance from that to the outer edges of the development. And when you look at the outer edges of the development, a lot of those roads are minor roads. And I guess my question is, I want to make sure that those minor roads are going to have footpaths that aren't going to be impeded by cars on driveways on small blocks, like we currently have that situation, and that we're not going to end up with children who are having to go a kilometre around to get to school out on a road, on minor roads, when everyone's rushing to get to work and things like that. I know how the small developments work, and I want to make sure that those pedestrian networks are going to work for us. And secondly, my second question is, with that bus route, I'm also noting there's a lot of minor roads coming off of that bus route or proposed bus route. Are we going to have bus embayments on that road? Because if we've got buses stopping in the middle of the road to let pedestrians off, that's going to congest that whole development.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, certainly a lot of this comes down to subdivision design and the detail that was at the next layer. So the LSP sets out where we will provide a bus route, how we'll provide that. It basically sets out the scope, but it doesn't get into the detail of what will, necessarily the exact road widths and whether or not a bus embayment. So that will be done through consultation through the WAPC and the PTA when they comment on the subdivision application, and we'll work through those based on the traffic advice and the analysis that's done at the next layer.
Councillor Baker.
didn't even stick my paw up. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a question to Mr. Baring. Just refer to page 236 of the agenda, the third last paragraph from the bottom. In the second sentence, it's stated, administration is concerned that a precedent has already been set for the removal of these crossing points for a financial rather than planning reason. Are you familiar with that observation, sir? Sorry? 236, third paragraph from the bottom, second sentence. Please.
Yeah, thank you. So the council and the administration opposed that removal of that other bridge. We felt that it served a viable purpose, and we were not supportive of the reason for removing that because we think they provide an important community purpose to. And in this case, if you look at state planning policy, livable neighbourhoods, a connection should be provided roughly every 500 metres along a rail corridor.
But once again, that sentence states, and I quote, administration is concerned that a precedent has already been set. Well, what is the precedent? It's not this particular agenda item or the bridge referred to in this agenda item. There must be a precedent set in terms of some other application.
Yes, no, there was a...
And what is the precedent?
Yes, I thought it was in that paragraph as well. Just if I have a second. I'll just take that on notice because I know that that's actually addressed in the report. We cite that example, but I just can't find it right this second.
Thank you.
Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just have a question. On the opposite side of the road, I see there is a section there for R25, R60 homes around that future primary school. Is that correct? Is that another estate going up into there?
Sorry, I missed the page number you're referring to. 312. Yeah. Oh, you're looking at that area map, the central precinct school context. You're talking about to the north of the subject site there.
Councillor Huntley, if you could just turn your microphone.
Sorry, on the north side, where the future primary school is,
Yes.
you've got a PS area, and then next to that you've got a very faint blue line, and that says R25, and I do believe that's an R60.
Yeah, there's certainly some additional density through and around the Eglinton town centre, which is subject of separate structure planning.
Yep, okay.
Are there any further questions on this item, councillors? There are none. Mr. Baring, I think we're moving on to 4.5.
Yes, thank you. Item 4.5 on tonight's agenda deals with a proposal to enable the use of car park on the subject site being Lot 108, number 252, Neves Road, Marigina. The subject site is approximately 2.4 hectares in area and zoned general rural and DPS2 and is future urban land, identified as future urban land under the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan. The activity is currently operating on site without the benefit of development approval and currently remains unauthorised. However, Council's local planning policy 4.14 compliance allows for unauthorised uses to continue provided that an application is submitted to seek to bring the use into compliance with the scheme. In this regard, Amendment 198 was proposed by the landowner to address the issue of non-compliance in terms of the permissibility of the use, and then and if that is resolved, then they will be able to deal with a development application to regularise the activity. Amendment 198 was first presented to Council on the 7th September last year, where Council adopted the amendment as a complex amendment requiring public consultation subject to WAPC and EPA endorsement to commence consultation. Subsequently, the amendment was advertised for public comment for 67 days, with 57 submissions received, 40 in support and 17 objecting. It is important to appreciate that proposed Amendment 198 will not by itself render the current activity lawful. If Amendment 198 is given final approval by the Minister for Planning, the applicant will still need to submit and obtain development approval under DPS2. The development application would then address the range of issues that have been raised in submissions relating to traffic, hours of operation, noise, dust, setbacks, visual impact and landscaping, among others. In order to address issues that have been raised in submissions, the applicant has modified the amendment proposal to limit the area as shown on attachment 6 at page 384 to a 5,000 square metre area. The applicant has also provided a concept plan for the site to demonstrate the extent of the proposed use on site. This would then be addressed at the development application stage. Administration also recommends that the car park use on the site be dealt with as an A use, which means that public consultation would be required on any future development application. This is consistent with Council's adopted position in relation to Amendment 199, which proposes enabling the same use car park across all general rural and rural resource zoned land within the city and to be assessed as an A use under DPS2. Amendment 199 was endorsed at the 12th of April Council meeting this year following public advertising, and it is now with the WAPC for consideration prior to a decision by the Minister for Planning. The amendment process cannot address all of the matters raised in submissions as they are largely dealt with at the development application stage. The comments made in submissions and deputations about imposing development standards in the scheme have been considered. However, there is no specific need to establish a bespoke range of development controls for this specific use in these zones, as DPS2 and the deemed regulations provide sufficient power and controls to deal with future development applications on site. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. One of the questions I wish to ask Mr Bowring on page 335 for your benefit, under the proposal, you've actually got in the table that's there that this is only going to, this use has to expire 3 years once the land is gazetted urban. Can you just clarify the meaning of that for me, please?
Turn my microphone off. That means that, yes, so essentially when the Metropolitan Region Scheme process is complete for East Wanneroo, or for that portion of the East Wanneroo area, and it becomes urban, so it would first normally be urban deferred and then becomes urban. At that point, they would have 3 years to close out the business on that site, in anticipation that we will start to see suburban development coming through that area.
So with that, and as we know, I think some of those lots along there are already now, I think, under the MRS urban deferred. I don't know if Mr Van Heineken can sort of confirm that. So we're waiting for the district structure plan later this year to be approved by the state. So therefore, this area may get urbanised later this year, if not next year. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So the district structure plan has been approved. It was approved by the state government last year. What they're doing at the moment, they're preparing a district level DCP for the area. And they're also looking at amendments to the MRS for those portions that haven't been rezoned to urban yet, so to urban deferred yet. So but that will go directly to urban essentially in order to facilitate development. So in terms of difficult to give a time frame, but I would say probably MRS amendment process is about a year, and the DCP will probably take 2 years. So but some of it can happen concurrently.
Okay, so just to clarify, and I think this area is included in that East Wanneroo area. So effectively, this additional use may only be effective for the next 4 or 5 years, maybe 6, depending on the time it takes for the urban to be zoned over this land. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
That's correct, but as to the time frame, yes, that remains unknown at this stage. Yep.
Okay, and the other issue I wanted to ask, obviously, as condition 2, or the proposal for condition 2, is that the existing property owners can only operate the additional use, and they have to stay on the property. They have to live there, obviously, and not rent it out. Is that right?
The condition 2 is only for the to apply to the 5,000 square metre area as marked out on the plan. It doesn't limit it to the current owners.
Oh, the way I was reading it, it says the landowners of the subject site will reside permanently on the property whilst also operating the additional use for the car park. That's the last sentence under number 2 on page 335.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. Modifying the text, page 335. Oh, I'm sorry. If I was looking at the recommendation from 346, actually, as presented to council, page 335 is the original, one of the original proposals, yes. Yeah. Yes, so the recommendation that we're putting is actually set out on 346, which doesn't have that constraint.
Okay, so why would we take that constraint out?
The use itself is what's relevant. The operator is not really relevant to the under the planning regulations. The approvals run with the land. They don't typically run with the owners. It really isn't a significant distinction in planning context as to who owns the activity.
One final question. So, as we know, the city itself has put up Amendment 199, which is to allow for caravan boat car parking or parking under the rural areas. If the city chooses not to adopt this 198 amendment, the proponent would then only need to wait until the city's 199 to go through, and then they could just put in a DA under that. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's 100% correct.
Councillor Baker next, I think, then Councillor Huntley, and then you, Councillor Savitton.
I've got the call, sir.
Councillor Baker,
Thanks,
yes.
Sorry, I refer to page 335, bottom paragraph. This issue of the car park, which of course is accommodating unauthorised caravan parking. With any DA, future DA, you'd think the city would have to set out the maximum number of so-called car parking bays or caravan parking bays. The city would also determine where those bays are to be positioned on the block of land relative to other improvements and relative to the boundary line. And the city would also, when determining that, would determine whether or not the existing screening, natural or man-made, was, or built, I should say, was adequate. Is that what's proposed to be addressed, or will those sorts of issues be addressed? And the other issue too is that many caravans, of course, even if they have solar panels and they're parked up during summer, subject to the positioning of trees and shading, of course, the solar panels may not be able to recharge the batteries in the caravan, and as such, most manufacturers recommend that caravan owners plug their caravans into 240-volt power, of course, source, even when they're not being used throughout the summer months. Well, I think it's fair to say that the winter months, in terms of caravan use, are much busier than the summer months. So would you like to perhaps just respond to some of those observations? Thanks, mate.
Yeah, thank you for that. Obviously, the parking and the controls that we would establish on a particular use would be merits based on and taking into consideration the specific site and its context, feedback received through consultation and the like. So yes, numbers of vans, positioning, landscaping, hours of operation, those sorts of things would all be addressed through the development application stage. And we can apply the principles and the objectives in the scheme and the specific controls that exist in there to be able to control a whole range of uses that are permitted on the site. This would just be another use that's able to be developed on the site. As to the operating requirements for the caravans and their solar collectors, it's not something that I can deal with within the scope of the scheme amendment, but certainly that's something that the operator would need to consider. Thank you.
Councillor Baker.
Just some supplementary. Just to confirm for me, if you can, please, that the vehicles or the the vehicles that will be parked, or the things with wheels that will be parked in the car park. It will not include commercial vehicles, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That would be a different land use entirely.
That's right, and you gave the example in the report of a bus. You can purchase a commercial bus second-hand. It's still a commercial bus. You park it up there, it's a commercial bus, but if someone then modifies that bus and turns it into a camper van, so to speak, or a camper bus, or a mobile home, then of course its character changes from commercial use to private use, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So an RV of such would be able to be parked on the site, yes.
Just a supplementary.
Councillor Baker.
I'm not playing the loophole game here, but of course this is often a game that is played, unfortunately, down the track. Hypothetically, you may have a person who owns a small truck. It's argued that, of course, it's a commercial vehicle because it has side gates. Of course, it looks like a truck. It's a commercial vehicle. It's licensed as a commercial vehicle, but its actual usage may not be as a commercial vehicle. So the question is, what is the test? Is the test what the vehicle is in terms of its licensing category, or is the test what its actual use is, irrespective of whether or not that actual usage was intended by the manufacturer when the item was manufactured?
My first inclination would be to say what it's actually licensed as. However, that would need, if that situation did come up, it might be something that we needed to test. Yep.
Councillor Huntley, had you down next.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question, it might be a part of the DA, but I do note that on this plan, on page 383, we've got the fence line with the new shed in front of it, but the distance is only 4.5 metres. Now, on all other rural land, it's 15 metres off the side fence lines and 25 metres off the front and rear fence lines. Yet these are only 4.5, and if you look on the opposite side where the existing shed is, there's actually caravans parked right up against inside of that fire break. Will that be pushed out by the DA?
Again, thank you for the question. It's certainly a matter that would need to be considered. Obviously, the setbacks that apply would need to be assessed at that DA stage. So the amendment itself doesn't deal with those standards. It's dealing just with the potential to approve the use. Yeah.
Just a supplementary. I'm just looking at the fact that, if that is built on or if that is used, then 4.5 metres isn't enough to actually put any sort of type of tree screening, which then does mean on that brick or limestone wall, will that need to be raised higher to allow the neighbour to have some privacy?
I'd imagine that there'd be a requirement for a fire break around the perimeter of the site, which may also affect landscaping. But again, that's a detail. While there's a concept there provided by the applicant, it doesn't inform a later development approval.
Councillor Savitton.
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I may have missed it in the report, but my question is, if the property is sold in the future, and I can't see development occurring there, even if it is rezoned for quite a few years yet, but if it is sold, does the use end at the sale of the property?
No, it doesn't. It runs with the land, so that was the intention of the amendment.
Councillor Baker.
Just a quick one, just trying to cover future loopholes as well, just thinking ahead. A lot of these storage facilities where caravans are stored are sometimes used as de facto informal caravan parks. You'd have to have obviously a condition in any DA that obviously no person can occupy, in inverted commas, a caravan, I assume. Obviously that's a policing matter as well, but I assume that's just an obvious condition as well, because I've seen many informal caravan storage facilities up north, particularly in the Kimberley Dampier Peninsula, where the storage facilities are actually de facto caravan parks, like gypsy villages, so to speak. What would you like to say in response?
Thank you. Yeah, that's certainly possible, but again, that would be a different definition, land use, which wouldn't be covered by an approval, and therefore capable, the city would be able to take enforcement action against.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? There are none. Mr Barring, I think that then takes us back to the top. So, item 4.1, councillors, are there any questions? Oh, Councillor Rowe, yes.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. My questions are on page 2 of the agenda proper. I've just got 2 of them. In the section that says detail, second dot point down, modify clause 3.1, which states the city will not accept local structure plans for assessment until the district DCP has been substantially commenced. I was just wondering if Mr Bowering could provide some more clarification or expansion on what that term substantially commenced would include.
Emile, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Substantially commenced is essentially once it's been publicly advertised, that's when it's considered to be substantially commenced, and then it's considered a real proposal, essentially. So previously, the advertised version of the policy essentially stated that it has to be completed, fully approved, but we have amended that, taking into account the comments during advertising, and it's now stating that it needs to be advertised in the first instance, and then we will accept local structure plans.
And just the second question, the second last dot point under the detail section refers to the technical advisory group, which is set up by the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. Is the membership of that group publicly available? Do we know what sort of people are on that group and the qualifications or the sectors that they represent?
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, that group, we can provide you with a list of the people represented. It's essentially consisting of agencies, state government agencies, as well as the City of Wanneroo is represented on there.
Excellent. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Nguyen?
Just a typo on page, small, I think 14, paragraph 3.3, third line down, that's just the word connected to needs. So I think delete the word to on that paragraph.
Thank you. We'll note that alteration.
Councillor Miles?
Thanks, Deputy. My question goes to something similar to Councillor Rowe. On page 2, just under the detail, I just want to clarify what administration's meaning is with regard to dot point 2, where you're not going to accept any local structure plans for assessment until the DCP has been substantially commenced and a development zone has been gazetted under the DPS2. Bearing in mind what you said earlier and what the Director has told us previously, so what you said earlier tonight and what the Director has said previously, that some of the precincts are already developing their local structure plans. Does that mean that we're not entertaining any conversations with any of those precincts now? How are you dealing with that?
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, the city encourages consultation, pre-consultation discussions with various landowners, and we are having those discussions continuously. So we are encouraging that. The Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, they also advise that they welcome conversations of proponents in terms of draft structure plans. So they're happy to have discussions with us. The intent of everybody involved is to make sure that when we actually receive the local structure plans, that everybody essentially have an in-principle agreement to it, so that there's not a lot of amendments and further discussions once they've lodged the local structure plan.
So just to also further for what you said earlier tonight, with regard to the Amendment 198. You're saying here that I welcome the fact that you're obviously discussing what people want to do with their local structure plans. I do welcome and support that because then everybody can be on the same page when it is finally lodged with the city. But you're also stating that the DCP has been substantially commenced, and also that the, where are we looking at here? The actual contribution scheme is finalised as well, and I'm assuming for each precinct, not as a whole. I'm just trying to work out, I don't want there to be any sort of roadblocks by the city because we haven't thought of something, and this looks to me like that we're going to say, well, until we've done a precinct level DCP, we're not going to accept a local structure plan. But I would have thought the local structure plan somewhat encompasses a DCP.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, essentially it refers to the district level DCP. So the district level DCP that covers the whole East Wanneroo area, that needs to be substantially commenced. So that must have been advertised before we can accept local structure plans. And the other requirement is that the amendments to the local planning scheme to align it with the MRS, that also needs to be substantially commenced, so that also needs to be advertised, so that essentially those two major informing planning mechanisms will then inform the local structure plans.
Okay, thank you. I get that. So just to finalise on that then, when are we going to advertising for our DCP?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the district level DCP is currently being drafted, like I stated before. That the aim is to finalise that by the end of this year. Then the state government will be asking the city to take that through the scheme amendment process. So from the end of this year, we will then be doing a scheme amendment to include the DCP, the district level DCP, into our planning scheme. So that is essentially the time frame, and that amendment in itself, usually a scheme amendment takes about, worst case scenario, I suppose, 1 year. So that is from the end of this year, 1 year, and then, but as part of that 1 year, it will be publicly advertised, and that's when it will actually be substantially progressed and by a real proposal, in which case we can accept local structure plans. So if that, in terms of that timeline, if it gets advertised, say, by June next year, that means by that time we can then start to accept local structure plans.
Any further questions on 4.1, councillors? There are none. 4.2, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just have a declaration of impartiality that I'd like to...
Yes, you do.
So with regard to item 4.2, I disclose that I have an impartiality interest. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker, and the voting will be for next week, of course. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Rowe?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. My question's regarding on page 42, particularly in the section about dog beaches. It says that several of the people who provided feedback suggested the recommendation of reduced hours, and I understand the city's trialling that on Gun Blossom Reserve. I just wanted to ask if administration was aware of any other local governments that were trialling or have implemented reduced hours or time restrictions, and if those other local governments had provided any information on the effectiveness of such a policy. Might be not for planning.
I'm not sure if, Debbie, are you able to assist, Director of Community Development?
Mrs. Terrelling?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't recall understanding whether other local governments have introduced such restrictions. It is a question I'd need to take on notice.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Rowe?
And then just the second one was in the gentleman who was presenting the deputation this evening mentioned the City of Mandra's policy. I was wondering if potentially between now and next week, administration could just liaise with the City of Mandurah just to clarify what their policy is and their coastal management plan and the effectiveness of it, because I know the person presenting the deputation said that they had no issues, but obviously it'd be good to get that information clarified before next week.
And probably also the applicability into this area as well. It doesn't necessarily follow that what may work in one location would work in every location. Councillor Sangale.
I only have one question, and it's to do with the infrastructure that goes into our beach areas and the hierarchy of the nodes. And I guess when I'm reading through it, one thing that has struck me is that over time, and even my own time being in a coastal location, the usability of a beach changes. And I know that when I first came to Quinns, one of our main swimming beaches was actually where the surf club currently is. But then it went through a period where it was not safe for swimming at all. There was a big undertow there, there was a lot of erosion, and it was something that the local community couldn't use. So much so that even the city withdrew some infrastructure from around that area. So I'm just worried that council themselves are tying themselves to a plan which says there's a hierarchy here and these are the only levels of infrastructure that we will introduce in these areas, but we don't recognise that the usability of the beach itself can change over time. So it's just something I just want to flag with council.
Because, I was just, was it a question that you wanted to bring, is council aware that I wanted to bring this to their attention? Was that the question that you were trying to phrase?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I'm trying to work out what the question was there, councillor. Emile, yes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So this hierarchy proposed as part of the CMP is taking into account the current situation. So it's taking into account one of the main informants of the hierarchy was the CHAR map that identifies areas of coastal erosion. So the CHAR map is essentially will be reviewed again and updated again. So it's a continuous review process. So that will then again inform the coastal management plan, the next iteration of it. So if things have changed in terms of erosion, then we can amend it. But we're talking about long-term timeframes here in terms of erosion and that, but it is an open process. This plan gets reviewed as well as the CHAR map, and both will take into account any changes and any implications for the hierarchy.
Oh, another question. Yeah, I thought you said you only had one.
Just a follow-up to that.
No worries, councillor.
I guess, there are quite a lot of planning items that will affect our coast coming up, and one more so than anything else, I guess, is the possibility of a future marina, and how much we all know how much a marina can change a city's coastline. So that is something that can happen very quickly, and I just want to make sure that this plan, I know that we can amend it, but it's a plan that we can actually do that quickly.
Councillor Sangale, in your summing up, I'm assuming you're actually going to have a question.
I'm asking, can we do that quickly?
Yes.
Councillor Miles. Sorry, Councillor Miles. I had Councillor Wright first.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question was in regards to the horse beach. Reading this report, it looks like administration's position on this has changed slightly due to the submissions. I just wanted to clarify with administration, is this now what you guys are pursuing in terms of actually looking for a horse beach now? So is that administration's formal position?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so I have to get used to that. Essentially, yes, the advertised version of the CMP didn't identify any horse beaches or any investigation for that, previously, the previous coastal management plan identified Tamala Park as a potential site, but that was further investigated after the previous CMP was approved, and it was found that it will lead too much clearing, so it will be too expensive to facilitate that. Plus, there was, because Joondalups got a horse beach at Hillary's, it was considered that it won't be necessary in the life of this plan. That it didn't mean, the assumption wasn't that it could be reconsidered in the future. But based on the submissions, there was a substantial number of submissions requesting the city to look at horse beaches, so that we have included that as an action to investigate that. So we will be doing that if council supports that approach, we will be investigating that as part of this CMP.
Yep, I'd have to say, Councillor Wright, probably a little bit before your time on council, naturally. The old city of Wanneroo identified a fantastic location for a beach, and it was Whitford's, and it was the best one we could get, or the old city. So that probably gives you a bit of background. Did you have a follow-up question, Councillor?
Yeah, just in regards to that, so it's subject to council if we choose to add that in this plan, is that right? Pending your investigation of whether there's a need for one and whether it's feasible or not?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So it has been included, and it's proposed that it's recommended to council that that be included as an action of the CMP. So there's a lot of other actions as well for investigations, like a potential dog beach proposed by Stockland as well. So those things will be investigated, and those actions will be implemented once council approves the CMP. And then that will be, depending on the outcome of that, we will report back to council on that for potential decisions.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I guess it was one of the items I had ticked off to have a look at. With reference to the horse beach, and I appreciate what the report says, I appreciate what you've said tonight. What's the timeline? So if council adopts this next week, when do you envisage bringing this back with the proposed location for a horse beach?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so the actions essentially have been identified. There's time frames associated with the actions, but this plan, the next step of this plan is actually to look at all those actions and to work out a project plan for those. So that will inform the timing of all the various actions. So we haven't completed that yet, because obviously it depends on council's adoption of this in the first instance before we can finalise that.
Okay. So this is a plan to develop a plan?
It's a strategic document that sets the framework for the development of the coastline. So it's not per se an implementation plan. The implementation plan is more of a, I suppose, a shorter time frame plan to look at all the actions identified through this.
The other part of the question I had, I was very impressed with Mr. McCarthy's deputation earlier tonight, as Councillor Rowe was. And I am also keen to see how the City of Mandurah adopted management plan is working down there, and whether ours is very similar. But one of the questions I had, and I was going to ask Mr. McCarthy, is, and I couldn't quite work out whether he was sort of suggesting that if you want to take a medium to small dog, you can sort of take it to any beach and maybe walk on a lead along the water's edge, but not go into the sand or the high water mark. Has administration looked at anything like that? Because I think what he was sort of suggesting was that you can take a dog, I'm talking about horses, a dog to any park, not have a lead, yet we're sort of making people only take their animals to, their small animals, to certain parts of the coastline. So is it water's edge stuff? Is it the high water mark? Did you look at that when you developed the policy, or did we not go that far?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so maybe just one point to note is we note that Mandurah has got a different approach, I just want to confirm that Joondalup and Stirling, and we've looked at their plans, and their plans are in alignment with ours and the same approach. We will be looking at Mandurah in a bit more detail. We have looked at it this today, but we will be reporting back on that as well. In terms of we've been looking at the main informant for identifying a dog beach is essentially the access, whether there's an access point to the beach, and looking at the access point in terms of the people with dogs and the access point of people without dogs and that don't want dogs. So it's essentially keeping the two groups separate, because although the gentleman has mentioned that we've got a 32-kilometre coastline, only 15% of that coastline actually have actual access. And also our community is very much split into a proportion that support dog beaches and a proportion that don't support dog beaches. So to make everything a dog beach could potentially not be in line with what the general community supports. In terms of, we also, as part of the identification of the dog beaches, we look at the safety of the beach itself, whether it is actually safe, and that's where coastal erosion and things like that come in. But essentially, the intent of this CMP is to keep the two parties separate, because there's obviously people that don't want, when they go to the beach, they don't want dogs in the vicinity and they feel threatened by that. And we have identified, we've looked at the population growth, we've looked at future needs. Therefore, based on that, we've identified Alkimos as a potential dog beach. As part of advertising, Stockland also proposed the potential dog beach at Alkimos, and we will be looking at that as well as potentially a seasonal dog beach. We'll be reporting back to you on that. And also we have extended we're proposing to extend the dog beaches at Alkimos, at Yanship, and basically Two Rocks and Yanship, so essentially providing more space for dogs as well. But I don't know if that answers your question, but in terms of the high water mark and all that,
Emil,
I'm not across that detail.
Emil, I think that was an extraordinarily fulsome response to a very short question from Councillor Miles. Councillor Miles, I'm assuming you're going to be happy with that response.
I just want to ask one. I know what the answer is, but if and this does happen. So if somebody motor sails or rides their whatever jet ski up the coastline and they go to a quiet spot and they get off, as you see them doing it on YouTube all the time. There's some good YouTubers locally. You can obviously go ashore. At what point? I mean, it may not be a site, and a ranger may pop out of nowhere and want to find these people. So that's I guess that's what Mr. McCarthy was also implying as well. I mean, at what point going onto a beach becomes the illegal part? And that's why I was talking about the high water mark, the low water mark, because the city is legally only responsible to the high water mark. So if you're walking your dog along a dog beach in the water and the shallows and the low water mark, that's state property. So that's why I was asking that question. Now, you can take that on notice if you like, but that was part of my question, because I think that's what he was also indicating.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. So essentially, when we identify a dog beach, we follow the Dog Act and the procedures stipulated in the Dog Act, and also our bylaw. So we essentially take that into account. In terms of the actual legalities of state-owned land, and that I could take that on notice, or I can ask the esteemed director to respond to that. I'm not sure.
I think our notice will be fine with that, I think, at this stage, and we tend to get bogged down on questions about dogs this week and last week. Are there any further, and Kat, any further questions on this item, councillors? Okay, there are no further questions on this item. We move on to item 4.3 we've done. So we on to item 4.4. Are there any questions on item 4.4, councillors? There are None. Thank you, Mr Baring. Thank you, Emile. Mr Shuttleberg, welcome. Assets.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, councillors. Tonight we just have item 4.6, which is Wagga RFQ 21238 for the provision of streetscape maintenance to arterial roads. So the issues to consider: the Wagga E-quote 21238 for maintenance of the city's arterial road network for a period of 2 years. Services provided under this contract were discussed at forum briefly last Tuesday on the 26th of April. The RFQ that was advertised and is put before you tonight is for a fixed sum contract based on 9 rotations per year. So that's 9 services per year to the arterial roads listed within the contract. The city is seeking to appoint a suitably qualified and experienced contract or contractors to provide streetscape maintenance services to the city's maintained arterial road networks. The contract itself was broken into 3 separable portions due to the size of the contract. Since this was first contracted out in 2014 under an initial contract, the size and scale of our arterial road network has increased significantly, hence the decision to advertise this as 3 separable portions. It gave applicants the opportunity to either provide pricing for all 3 portions or 1 or 2 thereof. Oversight for the process was undertaken by an external probity advisor. And a copy of that report is under confidential cover in attachment 2. The recommendation is as presented in regards to the proposed successful tenderers in regards to Skyline Services being awarded or considered for separable portions 1 and 3. And Sandpoint Pty trading as LD Total for separable portions 2. This is subject to appropriate funding availability for each of the financial years within the 2-year contract term. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Now, councillors, just a word of caution. If your questions relate in any way, shape or form to the confidential information, make a determination now, because if that is the case, we will need to go into confidential session. Councillor Baker?
Yeah, just a question, if I can, please. Look, perhaps I'm missing something, and this is a pretty dumb question, but tell me this: why do we have to chase tenders through Wagga? Why is that? Why do we do that? Why can't we just go out to the market ourselves rather than through Wagga? Do they charge a fee? Do they get a commission? Is there a markup? Why do we have to go through Wagga? I've never seen this done before with any contract that's come before the city since October 2019. Thanks.
That's probably a question for Mrs Jennings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We have actually answered this question not long ago. Wagga actually do substantial work that then means we don't have to do it. They make sure the contract is correct and have sets of rates, etc., that we can then use. So we don't, we're members of Wagga, so we're able to use that service. And so it does actually save us. And as I think I answered the question once before, we do look at who's on the various contract panels. And if we're happy with the people that are on there, that's usually when we go there, because we know that we actually are saving some time. Whereas if we find the panel to be a bit short, we will go out on our own. Thank you.
Mrs Jennings, if my memory serves, I think Walga actually presented to a forum on exactly that service within the past 3 to 4 months, I believe.
Deputy Mayor, that is correct because a similar question was raised and we
Yes.
brought Walga to give the presentation.
Thank you.
Supplementary,
Councillor
sir?
Baker.
Yeah, sorry, look, I didn't attend that forum. I think I had health issues on the night of that forum. But also, does Walga charge a fee for this service, or is it free of charge? Is it incorporated in our annual, what's the word, affiliation fee that we pay to Walga? I can't recall the amount every time. It's quite expensive, if I recall. Please.
Yep, Mrs Jennings.
Deputy Mayor, as I answered before, it is as we're members, we can use that service. Walga, I think, have arrangements, and they explained this before, with any people that bid to go on the panel, but it's not us that's paying it.
Yep. Councillor Baker.
Thanks. Another question to Ms Jennings. On page 396 of the agenda, in the 4th paragraph, there's reference to William Buck Consulting doing a probity check, so to speak, in respect of the tendering process. Were they engaged by Walga or were they engaged by the city, and hence the city would have to pay their consultancy fees, please? William Buck Consulting WA Proprietary Limited, please.
Mrs Jennings.
Yes, through Deputy Mayor, we often have probity auditors for major tenders, and that's us who's paying for that, so we organise it and pay for it.
Thanks.
Are there any further questions on this? Yep, Councillor Herridge.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Is there a grace period, or will this, if it goes through next week, start straight away?
Through the Deputy Mayor, no, the intention would be once we have a resolution from Council, we would then engage with the contractor for a start of the contract.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor. My only question was, I guess, a similar one to what Councillor Baker asked. And I was on the Zoom meeting where we had the Walga presentation, and I was relatively okay with it. But I didn't, or wasn't under the impression, and the CEO might be able to answer this, that we were then going to start using all of their tender processes, because we had a discussion on that Zoom meeting on whether or not the 4% that we have to pay in commission was actually a benefit or not a benefit. So and now this has come up. I understand it's the first one, but I'm just wondering whether the CEO is going to be using them more extensively.
For you, Mr Deputy Mayor, my understanding is we have used the Walga e-quote process for several years, and the presentation by Walga was in a request by council to understand how the service ran, and that service was explained. There was no intention to change the city's approach in terms of the Walga e-quote process from its previous practice. And I think Ms Jennings has explained the rationale that we use to determine when we use or not use the service.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And the presentation was a request of council to understand how Walga deals with their tender process and their other issues. I get that and I understand that. I have to say, and I don't have a problem with what administration have done with this one. I guess there was an urgent need to quickly pick up some maintenance issues, but I can't say that I've seen in our agenda a Walga RFQ like this. I know we've used services from Walga. It's usually consultation and other probably back office or maybe lower priced items, but not this level I haven't seen before. So if maybe administration can just take that on notice and provide it by supplementary data, would like it.
Mr CEO.
For you, Mr Deputy Mayor, I can't recall specific OCMs that e-quotes have been presented to council. I don't know if Ms Jennings can, otherwise we can provide a list in the notes as to the various times they've been presented to council.
It doesn't need to be a whole, like 6 years worth, but I haven't seen them on an agenda before. That's why it struck out to me. I understand we got the briefing and I understand what Mr Chettelberg wanted. Don't have a problem with that, but it just surprised me, that's all.
It's probably a demonstration of us being open and transparent, Councillor Miles. Councillor Baker, did you have an additional question there?
Yes, if I can. My understanding from what Ms Jennings said earlier was that the service is provided by virtue of the fact that we're affiliated with WELGA, whereas Councillor Miles mentioned something to do with a 4% commission of some kind. That's what you said? Is that commission a 4% commission charged by WELGA? No one disputed what he said. I assume that it was provided free of charge as part and parcel of our entitlements by virtue of our affiliation to WELGA. Which is correct, please?
Mrs Jennings?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I did say before that the WELGA have an arrangement with those that go on the actual panel as part of the process.
Yeah, and the understanding is that the membership fee that we pay covers those costs at no additional cost. Any other questions on this item, councillors? Thank you. Grant, that's your only item, I believe.
It is. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and councillors.
Thank you. We then go on to community and place.
Yes.
Welcome, Mrs Terrelink.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Apologies, it's a little bit tight.
Looks like a bit of a drop into the chair there.
It was. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So we have two items this evening from Community in Place, and I'm happy to take questions on either of those items. Thank you.
Councillors, will take them from the top. Now, bearing in mind if there are questions on 4.7, we would need to go into confidential session. So bear that in mind, councillors, if you have any questions. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, I did have a couple of questions on 4.7.
Yeah, just Councillor Miles, just before you go any further, do they refer to the confidential attachment?
They will.
Thank you. With that, we will need to clear the gallery, unfortunately. So if I could ask you to please, for a short period of time, Mr Smart, if you could assist, that would be good.
Just a point of order, Mr Chair. Is a procedural motion required for that purpose, or can
No,
you
it's
simply
not.
make that declaration
This is a
from the chair?
briefing session. It's a briefing session.
And there's only basically a very minor amendments that have been suggested by the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries.
Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Baker?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, this is the animals local law item.
It is.
Yes.
Hopefully it's not about cats, councillor.
Well, I'm just checking very carefully to make sure the word cat is not referred to in the document. No, it's safe. I can ask the question. Okay. Just a question, if I can, please, to Ms. Terry-Link. There's two definitions which sort of stand out a bit in my mind in the definition section or the interpretation section. One is large animals, and the words that are used are large animal includes. Then underneath that, there's livestock, and it reads livestock means rather than includes. I see that the word cow is included in the definition of large animal, but it's not duplicated in the definition of livestock. And once again, an emu was also included in the definition of large animal, but obviously that's not included in the definition of livestock, although alpacas are. What is the reasoning? Why, with that being trivial, why is it that a cow is not considered to be livestock? Please.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I think they're referred to in terms of livestock as cattle. Through you, Chair, yes, I would expect that would be the case.
All right. I just hope there's no sexism in these definitions, that's all.
Are there any further questions on this item? Yep, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I'm really pleased to see I can keep an ostrich, but never mind. My question is about the actual amounts of the penalty rate. So the penalty units are obviously between 10 and 20, 10, 15 and 20 penalty units. Do we actually have an idea of what these units equate to in a monetary sum, or whether, you know, how would the public work out what these rates were, what these penalty rates would mean?
I'll just ask Kate if she can provide some advice on that.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor. My understanding is that it's $25 per unit, but I'll take it on notice and confirm with you in the notes, if that's okay with you.
Question?
Councillor Baker.
Thank you. In terms of what the definition of penalty unit is, the local laws have a definition of penalty unit. It reads, penalty unit has the meaning given to it in the City of Wanneroo Penalty Units Local Law 2015. So I assume that that document refers to what the penalty unit is. I know that, for example, the Road Traffic Act, it expresses fines in terms of penalty units, and one penalty unit equals $50. And of course, that penalty unit can be adjusted through time. So rather than having to go through every clause, every offence within the animals local law every couple of years and up the monetary figure, it's just a matter of making one amendment to the penalty units local law, and then that's deemed to apply throughout all local laws that determine the size of fines by penalty units, hence monetary sums. Thanks.
One word answer to that one, Councillor Baker. Correct.
Yes, you are correct as well.
You are correct.
Double
yes.
correct. Thank you. 10 points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, Councillor Nguyen.
Just on the limitation of numbers of poultry, and so right now a person that has land less than 800 square metre can't have a pet duck. Is that right?
Mrs. Terrelling.
Yes, through you, Deputy Chair, if that's what's stated in the local law, then yes, that's correct.
What's the intent or purpose behind that?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I think it's an amenity issue in terms of your surrounding neighbours.
Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Terrelling. I've read through the local law and the amendments, etc. One thing that gets me is that the local law doesn't take into account how the animals referred to in this animal local law will interact with other animals living on the premises, such as an example, what Councillor Nguyen said, Generally speaking, cats and ducks don't get on, and cats and chooks don't get on. Is that just totally irrelevant for the purpose of the local law? In other words, there is the local law does not take into account any pre-existing animals that may be residing at any given address when applying this policy.
I hesitate to ask Mrs Terrelink, but if you could respond.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Cats and dogs are actually covered by different pieces of legislation, but I think we leave it to the pet owners or the animal owners to decide how their animals may interact.
That sounded like an entirely reasonable response. Are there any other questions, councillors, on this item? There being none, thank you, Mrs Terrelink. That's community in place done. We then move on to corporate strategy and performance. Mrs Jennings. Mrs Jennings, welcome.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and councillors. There are 3 reports in this section. I might take this mask off. There are 3 reports in this section. I'm happy to take questions.
Councillors, we'll take these from the top. So we're on 4.9. Councillor Baker.
A declaration of interest, please, sir, if I can.
Certainly,
Because
Councillor
we're dealing
Baker.
with the 3 on block. Yes, I'd like to make a declaration concerning an impartiality statement. In short, I better put my specs on here just a moment. Yes, with regard to item 4.11, I disclose that I'm a member of the Yanchep-Turok sub-branch of the RSL and have been a member of the RSL for 37 years. I refer to page 490 of the agenda, in particular expense number 2999. It was a donation made to the Yanchep-Turok sub-branch in respect of their booth that they had at the Splendid Park function where we hosted WASO. I declare that once again I'm a member of that sub-branch and also that I also played a role in terms of establishing that booth on the day and manning it throughout the evening. Thank you. I beg your pardon. And as a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected, which is ridiculous, and I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly.
That's in the warrant of payments, councillor?
Yes, that's 4.11.
Given that that's an expense that's already been undertaken, I'm not quite sure, but it's entirely up to you to declare the impartiality.
I'd rather err on the side of caution every time, please, Mr Chair.
Certainly, councillor. Now, we weren't taking these on block. We're at asking questions time. Councillors, 4.9. There is nil. 4.10. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess, as always, this is part of our consultation with the community, proposing a differential rates as under the Act. Just a couple of questions I had for you, Ms Jennings. I note with interest the WA CPI is at 7.6% for the year. Can you confirm whether you've seen that come through?
Through Deputy Mayor, the 7.6% is for Perth CPI from March, the 12 months previous to the end of March.
Thank you. And the other question I had was, do you, from time to time, look at, because obviously this goes out to consultation because we do differential rating. Have you looked at the city not doing differential? What is the major difference? I know it allows us, to some respect, to have more categories of rating in the dollar, but have you ever done any work in regards to just having one rating of the dollar across the board?
Through the Deputy Mayor, here at Wanneroo, we've always had differential rating. I have in other places actually looked at either a flat rate or differential rating, but a lot depends on how the valuations also change. So it can be that, well, I think even City of Stirling used to have a flat rate, but when there was a massive change with the valuations in the last cycle, they actually changed to differential too, because it was very difficult to manage.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this item, councillors? There is none. Item 4.11. And councillors, just a reminder that it's always preferential to lodge these questions in advance so the administration have a chance to honestly answer those questions when they are put. So framing it that way, Councillor Baker.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Mr Chair. No, I acknowledge that, but I did have a very busy weekend. I'm sorry, I apologise for that. My question relates to page 467 of the agenda. The expense item is 122,929. The pay is City of Willasea in Melbourne, Victoria, on the outer outskirts of Melbourne. The amount is $33,000. The particulars read NGAA membership 2122. And I think this question should perhaps be addressed to Ms Jennings, of course. What tangible benefits did the ratepayers of the City want to receive as a result of this $33,000 payment for a membership due to that organisation? And who, as at 1 November last year, were members of the executive of the NGAA, please?
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor, and thank Councillor Baker for the question. The benefits we provide is we're a part of a membership-based organisation that advocates at a national level for the needs of the outer growth areas of Australia. They have input into policy at a federal level. I'll have to take on notice the other two questions because at hand I can't recall the members that form the NGA across Australia.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr Chair. 219 once again. Dealing with the credit card, the pages of the report which relate to the use of credit cards, and they are pages 523 to 528 inclusive. As I read the date column, there's only one date referred to in the date column for scores of entries, yet all the other entries have no other date. I assume that all these entries weren't affected on the same day. In other words, the credit card wasn't used on one day or the same day for each of these scores and scores of expenditures. Is that the case? Because you'll note that obviously the expenditures are not item. There are no dates that appear under that heading credit cards except on page 523. I think, just bear with me. Yeah, 523. I mean, normally expect to see dates, obviously. I would have thought.
Mrs Jennings.
Through the Deputy Mayor. Oh, excuse me. Deputy Mayor, we have a statement from the bank once a month for corporate credit cards, and the new system takes them straight into the system, whereas before we'd have to do every sort of manually each card. So that's the difference.
Yep. And just before we go any further, Councillor Baker, clearly you've had an opportunity to identify a number of entries that you're likely to be asking questions on. Surely there would have been sufficient time for you to put those in email to provide some advice to administration, because I understand every councillor is busy around the table, councillor, so if we can get some, looking for better quality answers out of the administration, providing them the opportunity to research and provide good quality answers, affords them the respect of having some notice beforehand rather than doing it on the floor. I'll just in the future, councillors, if we could all endeavour to do that, because I think it's unreasonable for us to expect administration to have intimate knowledge of every payment that's made and expect an answer on the evening.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr Chair, but my typing skills aren't all that good.
It's all right, councillor.
It's only a briefing session.
I also want to bring this to the attention of council because I think it's important. Let us all understand the workplace health and safety legislation has changed, and we also have an obligation to make sure our staff are provided a safe working environment. So bearing that in the background, if we afford them the respect and the time to research these things in a respectful way, I think that's the way we should be carrying ourselves in the future.
I don't mean to prejudice the safety of staff in any manner whatsoever, Mr Chair. I can't see the correlation, quite frankly.
Oh, no, there is a direct correlation, Councillor, and just providing the opportunity for staff to adequately prepare just shows a level of mutual respect, I think, and that's something we should all be striving for. Thank you.
But I mean in terms of the word safety that you use, specifically the word
safety. Actually, it's called psychosocial safety, Councillor. Psychosocial safety. It's actually in the legislation, Councillor, and we have obligations. We have obligations and duties, Councillor, and we should all take them seriously.
I'll use my best endeavours to make sure that questions in future are in writing. If I can, please. Another question, please. Page 538. Expense item is 790. Particulars ledge point store -place management fraudulent transaction reported to NAB refund received 737. My understanding is that that must have been a credit card, obviously, and that credit card must have been signed out to someone, a council staff member or director, I don't know. Do we know who was in possession of the credit card at the time of the fraudulent transaction? Was it a case that the credit card was stolen? And what was the actual fraudulent transaction proper? Bearing in mind that the place of usage was the ledge point store, which I think also has a takeaway liquor licence attached to it. Thanks. And also sells burgers, but 737 worth of burgers is a hell of a lot of burgers. Unless they're buying cigarettes, I don't know.
Mrs Jennings, just by way of assisting, it would be exceptionally reasonable for you to accept these on notice and provide details later.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will have to take a part of it on notice, but I would say that generally and almost always that I'm aware of, these fraudulent credit cards aren't because someone physically went into the shop and used it. They've figured out a way of getting trialling numbers and then have made the transaction. So it won't be anything to do with the card holder.
Of course not. And any assertion to the contrary would not be reasonable. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I thank Ms Jennings for getting back to me on the items that I requested some more information on. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's still a little bit out of the ordinary for me, and it's item 792 on page 539, and I know it's only a small amount, but is it standard that we actually provide refreshment for contractors at these events, whether they be McDonald's or fish and chips or whatever it is? Is that part of contractual obligations that we have, or is this something that we're providing extra on top, or?
That might be Mrs Terrelink.
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor. The expenses were actually for drinks. We do purchase them occasionally from different places because we get better value for money. And yes, we do have some provisions under our contracts where we do provide refreshments for some of our contractors. So if they're arriving on the day to set up before the food trucks might be there, or there's other ways of getting them refreshments, we do purchase refreshments for them, particularly if they're putting up fencing and things like that in the heat. So we do have some contractual arrangements with some performers as well as contractors to provide them with non-alcoholic refreshments.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wright. Any other questions on this item, councillors? There are none. Thank you, Mrs Jennings. We then move on to the Chief Executive Office. Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. There is one report listed under the Chief Executive area, being 4.12, review of the City Standing Orders Local Law. This local law was first reviewed by Council at a workshop in the 25th of May 2021, was then subject to public advertising as per the local law process. Those submissions were then further reviewed at a council forum on the 19th of April 2022, and the local law is now presented to council for final approval. Our Executive Manager, Governance League, would be happy to answer any questions in regards to 4.12.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you very much. My question is addressed to Kate, please. Looking at the history of local laws at least made by the City of Wanneroo, the year of the local law is normally assigned on the basis of the year that the city resolved to approve the local law. But given that we're being asked to approve this local law, it seems to me that the year of the local law should be changed to 2021. As a simple example, the existing standing orders have the year 2008 and they were approved in the year 2008. That's just an observation. That's just perhaps a simple observation. Also, I see that in terms of the pro forma model, it carries a maximum penalty for breach of up to $5,000, whereas we've watered that down in our preferred model from $5,000 down to $1,000. What was the reasoning behind that? Well, 0 to 5,000 under the model, but we're saying no, 0 to 1,000 under our preferred model, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Baker. I appreciate that you didn't have the benefit of being at the forum where that was discussed. But I think at first instance, I'll answer the first component through you, Deputy Mayor, in terms of the date of the standing order. The title of the item is Review of Standing Orders Local Law 2008, but the actual Standing Orders Local Law as advertised is 2021, which reflects the date that it was adopted by Council for advertising. So I think you can be assured that the correct date will be reflected. In terms of the penalty that was given, whilst the model does say that when upon advertising and from feedback from the department, they felt that the penalty was, given the nature of the potential breaches under the local law and the intent behind them, it was more appropriate to be at that $1,000 level, and we accepted the comments from the department.
Another question?
Councillor Baker.
Just what I've done is I've compared the provisions within the proposed standing orders local law, of course, which constitutes local laws, of course, and a breach of those laws is an offence, and of course the offence will attract a penalty from $0 to up to $1,000, or perhaps no penalty at all. Perhaps if the matter proceeds to a formal prosecution, there'd be maybe a spent conviction declaration might be made. But I'm looking at the scenario whereby it may be alleged that a councillor has inappropriately dealt with a proponent, as defined in as defined in the proposed standing orders. And those dealings may result in a breach, therefore, of the standing orders, but they could also result in a breach of Division 3 of our Code of Conduct, Clause 10D, and also Division 4 of our Code of Conduct, Clause 22, dealing with the issue of failure to disclose interests, of course. In those circumstances, is it possible that one set of facts in that scenario, one single factual scenario, could give rise to, number one, a charge of breaching the standing orders, number two, an alleged breach of Division 3 of the Code of Conduct, and number three, an alleged breach of Division 4 of the Code of Conduct. In other words, it would be possible for one set of facts to give rise to three separate and distinct breaches, each carrying their own potential penalty or sanction. It strikes me as being a case involving double jeopardy, obviously, or triple jeopardy, I should say.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. As you'd be aware, well, let's not get into the processes of double jeopardy for the purpose of this, but pursuant to the advice we provided to you last week, in terms of the offences and the intentions behind them, this local law is based on a model that WALGA developed and then had approved by the Joint Standing Committee. It's WALGA's position that the component to having specific enforcement provisions was really to deal with environments that were occurring across the local government sector where members of the public were consistently breaching local laws in a manner that was becoming completely detrimental to the operation of local government and arguably unsafe for council members or administration. And so the idea is that the breach provisions from an offence perspective would only be pursued in relation to a member of the public, and that the Code of Conduct would be the appropriate method to deal with breaches by a member. Obviously, that will change depending on the nature of the complaint and who makes the complaint as to whether or not they refer to Division 3 or Division 4.
But I think you'd agree that, notwithstanding that prima facie, the offence provision in the proposed new standing orders applies equally to elected members, all elected members. There's no discrimination in terms of the penalty clause that applies across the board to any person.
You're absolutely right, Councillor Baker. Under the Local Government Act, the person who can institute proceedings on behalf of the local government is either someone who's been authorised duly or someone who's acting in their duties. In this case, someone who would be doing that is the city lawyer or the executive manager of governance and legal. That's how our internal processes work. In the process of developing this local law and reviewing these procedures, internal procedures will be tweaked to reflect that public interest test. Again, it was part of the advice that we provided last week, but a public interest assessment would be undertaken to determine that. You're correct, it technically does apply to all elected members, but the initial reaction, the way that we would apply it was how it was intended to be drafted and perceived.
And just a final question on clause 10.2 on page 659, that deals with who can prosecute. In terms of any prosecution, would the prosecuting authority be named as the City Wanneroo, or would it be named as the CEO, acting under a delegated authority, or some other officer of the city acting under, I assume, a delegated authority? You'd have to have a delegated authority to institute prosecution, I would have thought, rather than simply being a mere employee. There must be a formal delegation of that authority to institute proceedings, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Under the Local Government Act, it doesn't need to be a formal delegated authority, and I can give you those references separately or in the notes of the document. But in terms of who would be named as the party, it would be the City of Wanneroo.
Thank you.
Councillor Nguyen.
You've answered, I say, some of the questions I've had. So thank you for that. Just in relation to the penalty for breach again, when was the last time the city actually prosecuted someone under that provision or enforced that provision?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen, and through you, Chair. So the current standing orders are drafted in a manner that contemplates enforcement but doesn't have a specific express provision for enforcement, and to our knowledge, it hasn't been enforced.
If I'm not, thank you, Councillor Baker, we can answer. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a certain degree of discretion that would be provided and would be available, Mr. CEO.
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Also, I can't recall in the tenure that I've been Chief Executive having a reason to look for a prosecution of the current standing orders.
Okay. And in relation to that particular provision 10.1, or it says a person who breaches a provision of these standing orders, so potentially there could be breaches of even just the standing orders itself, that any of the members could be up for that potential fine if we don't follow the standing orders. Is that how I read it?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen.
Leaving aside this question you mentioned earlier.
Well, so it's not a fine in the sense of an infringement notice. It would be a prosecution in the magistrate's court, so you would have to be found guilty. But yes, technically that is what it is open to, and it reflects the model that's approved by the Joint Standing Committee.
So I've got just a couple of more questions. Just on page 34, that's paragraph 7.12. I think there are the extra subclause under subclauses 7, 8 and 9.
Sorry, could you just give me the page reference? Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry,
I missed that.
page 611. So under 7.12 and then subclause 7, 8 and 9, I think we've got a reference to subclause twice on each of those paragraphs.
Sorry, is the councillor
Yeah,
referring
I think
to?
Councillor Yoon, you're looking at the marked up version as opposed to the final version. I might be able to find that reference for you directly, but we'll check for any typos accordingly.
Yeah, and just in relation to the deletion of clauses 11 to 13, where we've removed the opportunity of a councillor who have found to have breached the code to then have an opportunity to comment on the proposed action. I would have thought that would be a good idea for anyone who have breached the code to have an opportunity to comment on any action plan that may be imposed. Especially, we want the person to I guess, understand the nature of the breach and to, I guess, participate as part of the plan.
Sorry, through you, Deputy Chair, did you have something to say, or would you like me, is it okay to answer? Sorry, thank you. Sorry, and thank you for the question, Councillor Nguyen. I think, as you'd recall, under the new complaints handling policy, there's only one form of action plan available now, and so the ability to comment on it is somewhat irrelevant. The respondent is given the opportunity to provide their comment as part of the process, and in terms of providing an additional comment to the action plan, it's really a determination of whether an action plan should be implemented or not, rather than whether or not what it would entail. Following that decision by council, the way that it would work under that policy, and I do apologise, Deputy Mayor, I know that's slightly off topic for this item, but worth answering, that would be then dealt with, and I'll put it in the notes for you and refer to you separately, but they will then implement that plan along with the respondent should that be required.
Okay, and I remember some time ago, and probably the CEO may remember this, in relation to chairing of a meeting for breach of Division 3, if there was a complaint against the chairperson, then the deputy mayor or some other person would chair the meeting. But those provisions, I can't seem to see them in the standing orders anymore.
For you, Mr Deputy Mayor, I might ask our Executive Manager, Governance for Legal, or our Director of Corporate Strategy Performance to provide that answer, because I believe we've provided that clarification previously.
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen, and through you, Chair. So that I think you're referring to a management procedure which is no longer effective and was indeed never relied upon. In terms of its inclusion in the standing orders, that was never contemplated, never been included in the standing orders.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I just wanted to flag that I've got an amendment for next week. Thank you.
Of course you have, Councillor Wright. Councillor Baker.
Thanks. Just another question to Kate, please. Kate, as you'd be aware, the Commonwealth DPP, the State DPP and the West Australian Police Service each have their own prosecution policy, which considers various discretionary criteria when determining whether or not to prosecute a person, such as is it in the public interest, the seriousness of the offence, likelihood of recidivism in the future. Does the city have such a policy? Because we have various local laws that we enforce, and as I understand it, the methodology used with State, Commonwealth DPP and WAPOL, the Federal Police even, is that they must refer to that policy when they first of all make a decision to exercise the discretion to prosecute. Do we have such a policy, please?
Thank you, Councillor Baker, and through you, Deputy. Actually, in my tenure as City Lawyer, we did investigate whether or not that policy was required. I did an audit at the time of all the different prosecution notices that came across my desk. The diversity of prosecutions that the city sees meant that we couldn't have a one-size-fit-all policy. And so instead what the decision was at the time was to rely on, and it's provided in the Local Government Act, to rely on the public interest test. And so as part of the duty of the City Lawyer and in lieu of the City Lawyer, the Executive Manager of Governance and Legal, they assess the public interest test based on that legal maxim. And so quite often we will assess, for example, the nature of the infringement against the potential penalty and the cost to the city, and regularly do a public interest test. It would be something that would occur nearly on a weekly basis.
Thank you.
And just, sorry, Councillor Nguyen, yes?
Yeah, just last thing. Can you clarify, just recording of proceedings, does that include confidential closed-door meetings as well?
Mr CEO?
No, thank you for you, Mr Deputy Mayor. No, it doesn't, unless Council specifically resolves by resolution to do so.
And councillors, I'll just touch on this point. Just with respect to a comment that was made earlier, with respect to the person who would... a potential prosecution doesn't happen automatically. It's actually incumbent upon the presiding person to draw to the attention of the individual as to what breaches may be in question, because there needs to be a course of natural justice, procedural fairness even at that stage. So it's not an automatic thing, it's up to the chair. But Councillor Baker, you had a
and just to add, there can be an apology, of course, and that may then summarily dismiss or deal with the matter. Just a question. My understanding to the CEO. My understanding is that the city, prior to 30 June this year, will be moving to audio and visual live streaming, which I assume involves recording as well. Correct. New proposed Standing Order 9.4 proposes that it states that the CEO is to ensure that an audio recording is taken at the proceedings of each meeting. I take it. Well, I don't know, but rather than us amending the standing orders once we are up and running with audio, visual live streaming and recording, perhaps, well, I assume that the word visual needs to be spelt out, because at the moment that clause 9.4a only applies to audio recording. And I assume that as we stream, we will record as we stream. I assume. Is that what's proposed with the new system that will be in place prior to 30 June this year, please?
Mr.
CEO. So just in regards to that clause, at the moment, Council has so if it refers to confidential items, no, because Council has a policy that says they are not recorded. So that would be in line with that they wouldn't be recorded. I would just have to default to Mrs. Jennings. I have yet to see what system we're actually purchasing in terms of the visual component. I know the audio is working now, and what dates Mrs. Jennings is working to in terms of having it actually live and working and visually and audio streaming.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm trying to remember, I did send it out, but I think it was about July-ish that we're looking at. So, you know.
Perhaps we can keep Council up to date as we are progressing with procurement and testing.
Further questions on this item, councillors? There being none, and Councillor Wright has foreshadowed an amendment. Councillors, we then move on to item 5, which is motions on notice, and we have 3 for next week. 2 from Councillor Wright, 1 from Councillor Parker.
Could I just also make a declaration of interest in relation to 5.2, which is one of my motions on notice, which I will do next week, as I am a resident on East Road as well, but not close enough for a proximity interest.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. We then move on to item 6, late reports to be circulated under cover. Yeah, and we just noting, councillors, that we have only a discussion with the CEO under confidential items. Item 7, public question time. Gosh, they've just left. What a pity. Item 8, confidential. Councillors, we move into confidential discussions, and this is a discussion, as has been identified, as a confidential staff matter. Okay, councillors, that closes the confidential session. We move then on to item 9, which is date of next meeting. Ordinary council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 10th of May 2022 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers at 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. Item 10 is closure, and I declare the meeting closed at 9:07 p.m. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Brett.